our conversation.
I want to correct one thing, Joanna.
What?
Which is Matt referred to acquisitions. These are not, Emily and Wesley are not acquisitions. We deliberately use the word mergers. And the reason is that we're trying to build a unitary company, one company, not a fragmented series of companies. So
have you already begun before I've even asked you a question? I don't
want the audience to be under any misapprehension whatsoever.
I think by the end of the 45 minutes, yes, 45 minutes, they're going to be under no misapprehensions at all. So look, the industry was entirely agog when you left WPP and you, within weeks of leaving it in terribly dramatic, sort of exciting, over-reported circumstances, started S4 Capital.
Yeah.
And then last year you bought MediaMonks, or you merged with MediaMonks.
Yeah.
And then at Christmas, or the holidays,
Christmas Eve, yeah.
You merged with MightyHive.
Right.
And you are very much a new kind of holding company.
No.
No, you're not.
We are not a holding company.
Okay, you're under no apprehension.
We are the Antichrist.
All right, you're the anti-holding company. What the hell are you then?
Well, so four things really. Try and make it brief. We're purely digital. That's the only thing we're interested in. We want to lumber into or be dragged down or weighed down by traditional, and just anybody who wins any of the big traditional media pitches, I would short the stock because they're operating in a low growth or no growth environment.
Okay, who are you talking about specifically so everybody here can short the stock immediately?
Well, we'll see who wins all the major traditional pitches because I think that's where the pressure is. Our industry is the media part of the industry is 500 billion. The half that's in digital is growing at 20%. The overall is growing about 4 or 5% according to WPP and IPG, the experts there. So what is the other happening to the other traditional half? I mean, if you do the maths, it must be declining at a fairly prodigious rate. So one is purely digital because that's where the growth is. Number two is we have this Holy Trinity model. Wes will go into it a bit with Emily. A Holy Trinity model of first-party data driving and fueling content, digital advertising content, and programmatic in a continuous loop. Doesn't mean that tentpole campaigns don't exist, big films exist, there will always be the World Cup or the Olympics or whatever, but essentially we're in a continuously iterative world where things are changing at warp speed and you have to keep up in an iterative way. So it's a circular, it's like running an election campaign without election date. The third thing is faster, better, cheaper. I did a panel with Deborah Wall of newly promoted CMO of General Motors, and she talked about agility. I mean, I think her framework for the job is around agility and efficiency and effectiveness, which plays to our mantra of faster, better, cheaper. Faster means agility, better means understanding the digital ecosystem. And cheaper is more efficient. And the final thing is what I touched on before, the unitary. I want this company to be a group of people who share the vision. Our deals are half shares, half cash. And the reason, they're not fragmenting earnouts over long periods of time. And the reason for that is we want people to buy in to this, what is essentially a disruptive model. I mean, let's make no bones about it. We are trying to disrupt the industry. I used to use the analogy of 3G and ZBB, and probably that's not such a good analogy to make nowadays. But essentially, we're trying to change the way that the industry operates in a world that has changed. And I did a panel with last night. It was so depressing. The people on the panel are mainly talking about the traditional industry, and they're so depressed. Their mindset is so negative. And they're looking back to the days of Don Draper and looking at the industry through rose-tinted spectacles. It's very vibrant what we're doing. We're growing at 40% top line in the first half of this year. We expect by this year we'll be up 50% overall for the year. Strong margins. We attract people. The average age of people at MightyHive is 25. The average age of people at MediaMonks is 33. In a year, we have now 1,550 people in 22 countries. We get, inbound, not just on deals, but inbound on people to an extraordinary degree. So what we're doing is exciting, and it's vibrant, and it's optimistic. It's not, the industry is beset by pessimism.
Well, one of the things I always found odd when I was working in the media very closely with advertising was that advertising has this reputation for being exciting, and people in advertising are quite self-regarding, especially creatives, not you, Wes. And one of the things that I always found odd was that they were unbelievably conservative. So to hear you talk about the panel you were on last night, and obviously we want to know who was on the panel last night, but why is this industry so slow to change? This is so obvious what's been happening. We've watched it disrupt publishing, media, music, television. Well, why is the advertising world
every as Emily and Wes know, every legacy company has this problem, particularly what I call uncontrolled listed companies. These are companies where founders or management doesn't have control. And great separation between ownership and control in those uncontrolled listed companies. Mm-hmm. And I think it's virtually impossible. You see this with the 6 holding companies. To be fair, Publicis maybe and WPP to a lesser extent have shifted their structures. Omnicom and IPG really haven't shifted their structures. Dentsu is probably an outlier because it's controlled by the Japanese, and the Japanese have their the Japanese at Dentsu are driving out the gaijins. It's sort of a little bit like Carlos Ghosn, maybe not quite similar, but driving out. Jerry Bullman goes and other people go. So it's a little bit different. Havas has disappeared into Vivendi, a different model. Probably actually quite interesting because it's owned by a media company. But essentially, every legacy company has this problem. You could say this about the banks. Why do the banks not become more structurally changed quickly? It's because CEOs on average last for about 5 or 6 years, and they don't want to take the steps necessary because it's a big hole in their P&L.
Right, well, and because they can't wean themselves off the legacy revenue, right?
It's tough. And by the way, I was guilty of the same at WPP. We would make promises to the city or the street about what the legacy business would do, because that was the cash cow, if you like, revenue. And it was making money in the old-fashioned way, margins, cash flow, revenue, margins, etc. And if they didn't make it, or they weren't making it, we put pressure on the legacy business to perform more, which made them more resistant to change. It made them more nervous. Whereas, Ariana Huffington just did a piece there, and I said to her when she was walking out, the phrase that I use, and I use it again. She said, failure is not the opposite of success. It's the platform to success. And there is something really in that. But what we've tended to do when we run these businesses or try to run them is to put constraints around them that makes them more nervous, more resistant. And it's tough to change. The tech companies, and Wesley and I and Pete Emily's colleague, yesterday with a major tech firm here in New York. And it's like, it's chalk and cheese. We're talking to people who are totally accustomed to change, who wish to be disruptors, take pride in being disruptors. They work with a clean sheet of paper, which is the advantage that we have. We started a year ago, and then 6 years ago at MightyHive, 16 years ago, 17 years ago at MediaMonks. So the mentality is totally different. The other thing is, neither MediaMonks or MightyHive is populated to a major degree by agency people. And I will not import this, maybe controversial thing to say, I will not import traditional agency inflation into our structure. We get a lot of inbound from people who want to leave the 6 holding companies to an incredible degree. There are people we will take, and there are people who won't, but anybody who comes has to change the way that they think, change the way that they are remunerated, and change the way they behave. That has to happen.
All right, so let me bring Emily in here and talk a little bit about the ability to be so much more agile because you have access to enormous data, and also the speed with which that changes how people approach a client.
Certainly, to your point, everybody here, everybody in this room, or most people in this room are involved in advertising and marketing, right? But the change that we're seeing, the change that MightyHive has brought in to develop within companies, it's not just about advertising. Every company is going through this. I mean, for goodness sakes, there's an entire presidential campaign designed around the fact that the American economy is not prepared for the level of change that technology is ushering in, right? So for us at MightyHive, what we bring to the table with marketers who are seeking to be more agile, you know, people always say, I want to be more agile. It's become such a buzzword thanks to tech. What does that actually mean? You know, we have a marketer we're working with who is a consumer healthcare brand, and that marketer, just like every other packaged goods company, is trying to figure out how to hold on to market share, how to stabilize, let alone grow. And so the SVPs in marketing are meeting with Walmart, they're meeting with CVS, and in those meetings, they're doing deals where, hey, Walmart, if you give me better shelf space, if I'm on an end cap, I will give you placement in my digital ads. And in theory, that sounds good. In the case of, you know, what does Agile really look like? We have this marketer making the deal in Arkansas on Wednesday, and by Thursday evening, the new creative is out in market.
Right.
And that creative features Walmart, and it clicks through directly to walmart.com. That deal isn't just about advertising. That deal is about keeping the consumer healthcare company, which happens to be 100 years old, in business. But
so just talk us through the process of that. So I'm the client, you decide that that's what you want to do. Who do you call the creative from Arkansas and say, this is what we're doing and we want it out by tomorrow? Because you know that there's a whole generation of people who can make content that fast, and they've been making it and getting immediate response by likes on Instagram or Facebook. So we have a generation of people who are able to do this, and yet I think the advertising industry has created this great sort of drama and hallowed territory around creatives, which seems now utterly irrelevant.
Using a very narrow definition of creativity. I mean,
Well, the people that are putting the message together for the audience.
You know, they're described as a programmatic business, and there's almost an assumption in traditional agencies that means that they aren't creative. But
well, all right, I mean content makers then, because there's got to be content in the ad that's going out on the Thursday night, right? So how is that conversation must be entirely different to any conversation that was ever had in an agency 20 years ago, for example?
I think that's fair. I think when you're planning for a 30-second spot and the cost associated with distributing that in linear television, you can't afford to act fast. Everything needs to be planned ahead. And part of the marriage of our two companies is about, you know, his team taking the risks on what it looks like and our team coming back quickly with feedback on that. And, you know, making a 300 by 250 banner that doesn't work is not going to ruin anyone's career. That's like, you know, 2 o'clock on Tuesday, you've recovered by 5, right? And I think it's just the pace at which things are happening enable you to take more risks, which frankly in a traditional media environment, you know, you can't do that. It's not really meant to work that way. So I think it's getting people more comfortable with saying, what if? You know, what if we did try and do this? What would it look like? And, you know, in the type of work that we do, which is highly disruptive and replacing external professional services firms with in-house teams, you know, full-time employees will say, I'll take the risk. I'm a shareholder in this consumer health company. If making this deal with Walmart is going to help us get better market share, then yeah, I'll put the Walmart logo on the ad and see if that works. And if it doesn't, we'll recover by Tuesday. We'll try something different, you know?
Okay, so Wes, you look like the quintessential creative in an
poster child.
Yeah.
Everything that's wrong with the industry.
And you have a Scandi accent, which is
it helps.
Yeah, it's just the icing on the gâteau. What is this like for you?
So I'll go back to the conservative comment you made at the beginning. I think that's the traditional or legacy agencies. There's a conservatism that you cannot really marry with being creative. And I think the conservatism is partly the defensive component of just being in a shrinking industry, and it's partly not wanting to invest the time and real sort of attention to detail that all of these digital channels now really need you to take to understand user behavior, to understand data. And what's happened in our industry is that that has always been seen as something that is lesser than a traditional big idea. But if you look at today's landscape, you talk to Google, you talk to Facebook, they pretty much have the same stat. 80% of creative attention goes to 20% of the media buy. So it's not just a dismissive mentality, it's also made that industry sort of silo itself into something that's of lesser importance, because the work you're doing isn't actually the work that is reaching at scale. It's not the work that people are engaging and interacting with. And that's work that's been left to a large extent to junior teams in those types of companies, or to different companies that have bubbled up instead of the legacy agency. So the conservatism to me is really the key component. Our team we've been in business 18 years. It's amazing that a decade ago we were going, this is going to get solved quickly because there is real-time data available. We should be looking at that not just daily, we should be looking at it hour by hour and doing creative, agile updates and changes and pilots and tests. To this very day, I see the results of campaigns 2 months after they run, to this very day. And that level of conservatism, I think, has killed the ability to do great, really exciting digital creative work, because it takes away the idea that you can change quickly.
Well, and also the crazy thing is that the consumer is then ahead of you, right? Because the consumer is seeing what's happening in real time and responding in real time, and yet the advertising is lumbering along behind it.
Advertising is so far behind user behavior. We were talking to Facebook recently. The users are moving to stories. Advertising is still making choices about feed advertising. The user is already onto the next thing. So advertising isn't just lagging creatively, it's lagging really in the understanding of what users are doing, where they're spending their time. And that's been the story for the last decade now.
Yeah, just one thing in defense of the
industry you love.
Like a slag off session. What we did, you know, and I ran a holding company for 30 odd years. What we did was it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. So for example, you take JWT, Ogilvy, Wynar, and Gray that we consolidated into WPP. What did we do on media? JWT, I remember, it was run by Chris Jones, and Ogilvy was run by Shelley Lazarus, and we were losing so much media business to the media independents, Western International, the Grow Brothers, CIA, and Chris Ingram, etc. And we said, look, the market clearly is looking for media specialization. So let's take the media away from JWT and Ogilvy and form Mindshare. So JWT and Ogilvy lost, as an agency, media.
Right.
Then with digital, now digital comes along, the high growth area. We take that away. You know, let's go with Wonderman. Let's go with VML. Let's go with AKQA. So you stripped the historic brands, which were mini WPPs anyway, when we took them over. And the same thing applies to the Big Bang at Omnicom, or Publicis doing Saatchi and Burnett and BABH. So in an attempt to specialize, what we didn't do, what we failed to do, and they're trying to do now to play catch up, is create one firm. And that still is their biggest problem. They're like the other legacy businesses. They're verticals. I know horizontality is a word that is now banned. You know,
rightly so.
You have your head chopped off if you mention that word. But it is still the key. Getting people to think laterally about the business and about the clients is the critical thing. And you know, we're only 1,550 people, but we still have to wrestle with that issue too. How do we deliver the very best people in the very best way? So it was almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And just to throw a rock into the pool, I think what will happen with the holding companies, they'll be deconsolidated. You're starting to beginning to see that with Kantar at WPP. So we'll go back. This will be a circular thing. We'll go back to where the industry was many years ago, and these businesses will be broken up and separated. Because together, unless they find some secret source, and I think, you know, the proof of that is IPG. You know, IPG appears to be the best performer. Why? Being in America is part of it. You know, Roth and Wren are here, New York or Palm Beach, but they're here. and they're also, inside IPG, you know, McCann is about 75%, whatever it is, of the business, and it's one integrated business. And I think that's the key. You have to get people to think, you know, in the same direction at the same point in time.
So, Emily, are you hiring completely different people now than you would have done, say, 5, 10 years ago?
Well, we're only 7 years old,
But I mean, in terms of the industry, because I bet a lot of the people that you hire now weren't even in the industry 10 years ago. I don't mean age-wise, but the jobs didn't exist.
Yes, 100% yes. Both because our business is changing, but also because the skill set that we need to do the work that we're doing initially started out with a clean sheet of, let's take a perspective that actually the deepest technical parts of advertising, sure, they have buzzwords and there's an entire industry designed to make us all feel like we don't understand it, but it can be taught. So the vision with MightyHive was, no, we're going to approach this that it can be taught, that it is a skill like anything else. And so we hired people specifically right out of university, immediately upon graduation, and then we invested in training them in a program that we call Mighty School, where we took the exact same curriculum that the tech firms use internally and taught them how to use these tools. We didn't teach them marketing per se, we taught them how to use technology in this way. As we've grown up, and our first client ever was a company that sold equine vitamins out of California. and we've moved on from there, still a great customer. And so we've had to change and add additional talent who can help do the work we're doing today, which is not just doing this ourselves, but actually helping marketers build the muscle internally to do it themselves. So we are hiring people who have a background in management consulting, people who are analytical and have a background from finance, all of whom are feeling a little bit lost or a little bit frustrated or a little bit bored in their current industries and find advertising to have enough flexibility and just kind of sexiness that the industry is appealing, and they're finding a home with us. And frankly, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have had that home for them, but because we've risen up and there's a greater demand for the type of work that we do, we've got an even bigger kind of diversity of talent than we had.
Okay. So Wes, you've got some work you're going to show us. Before you do, how do you actually practically work with these guys?
It's interesting. We've been working together now for about 6 months. And what we're seeing is, to an extent, it is finding the right client that doesn't just say they want to be agile or say they want to work differently, but that are actually committed to working in a completely different way. And some of the work I'll show sort of talks about that in a bit more detail. I think the practicalities of it is we're seeing a lot of overlap where MightyHive has put the tracks in place. They've gone into these businesses, they simplified, they've managed to take back control over data, a real understanding how that data is being used to talk to their consumers or potential consumers, and then we're driving the train of content on top of those tracks. That's where we've started, and it means we're being fed with amazing insights and data that are not an abstraction, but the real deal, and we can optimize, update, pilot, A/B test, A, B, C, D test continuously to see better results, which is a dream for my team because we've always been sort of in this black box. What we're seeing now is, that's where it started, what we're seeing now is big integrated RFPs where clients are going, we want this from scratch. So we want a team of MightyHive and MediaMonks, the S4 team, to go into our organization, completely restructure how we work from the data backup, so marketing tech stack, all the way into production. And that's very interesting. We're getting pulled into the big network pitches, even though we don't use holding or network. I think Sir Martin means we get sort of lobbed in with those teams. So we're getting pulled into those things now.
And that's interesting because we're only doing the digital piece, and we've made it absolutely clear we're not interested in any traditional whatsoever. So we want to focus on the digital piece, and the clients, this wave of pitches is happening at the moment. It's not Mediapalooza or a tsunami, but there's certainly a significant number at the moment, a large number of which we're in. And it's not we get invited in, we try and push our way in, obviously. It's not just sort of passive, it's active. But it's interesting, I think the clients are much more sophisticated in their pitching process. Now, these are refinement, these are considered pitches. These are, Mediapalooza 1 and 2, whatever you want to call it, were much cruder, throwing mud against the wall, seeing how much cost, you could reduce. This is much more refined. And what's being said to us is, you look at the RFP and what you think you can do, tell us. If you can't do anything, fine, no hard feelings, fine. But tell us what you can do, and then the client is starting to do the coordination. It's interesting that, particularly between traditional and digital, I think the clients are prepared. We say, where's MediaMonks, MightyHive will work with anybody, to get the job done. And we're not, concerned about client control. One of the phobias that agencies have is you mustn't let anybody talk to your client. This is why, with the basis of the fear about Google and Facebook, I don't think Google and Facebook want to steal our business. I think what they want to do is talk directly to the clients so they get a better relationship, which will cause us, pressure on us and agencies to use their distribution channels. And so what they want is a better relationship. The other phobia the traditional agency has is incumbency. So there's this sort of Pavlovian reaction to the suggestion of in-housing. We have no phobias about that. You want in-housing? We agree that it's the best thing to do? Well, we'll do it. And we'll do the training around it, because that's an issue. And the maintenance of, care and maintenance of the people, and we'll update the technology with you. So it's a very different approach, and it's a much more sophisticated approach now, I think. And we've got over 2008-9. We've got over the rise of the wall, not got over it, but we've seen the rise of the walls and the walled gardens. So I think clients are becoming not more relaxed. They're still as agitated and anxious as before, but intellectually, I think they're becoming more sophisticated, and that's helping us, I think.
And the consumer, this is all happening also at a time when the consumer is trying to avoid ads, right? They're able to skip them, everybody's getting subscriptions. So actually, in theory, the places where you can avoid, or there are more and more places where you can avoid advertising altogether. And that doesn't look like it's going to change. So presumably that's behind a lot of what you're doing too.
Yeah, you talk about that in relation to the work.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space, and we've seen Facebook sort of leading the way, rightfully so, about more sort of private channels, more intimate group sort of conversations happening. I think voice is going to be really interesting because it's such a closed ecosystem. I think a lot of the AR channels are going to be owned by Apple and Google, so you sort of get into ever restrictive channels where I'm not sure the current sort of generation of users would expect advertising. We've seen some tests on voice and people freaked out, right? Because it's this very personal device. So I think that's going to mean...
Just what kind of tests?
Google actually did a small advertising test last year where I think it was to promote a movie, and you would get it as one of the answers in specific areas of interest if you would ask your home, and people freaked out. So there's sort of this tech clash happening to an extent. There's a pushback against advertising. If you look at the other side of that, I think people feel very comfortable with influencer marketing. So there's two sides to this thing. So I think more and more we'll see brands almost sort of traditionally do borrowed attention with influencers, but being really part of a community in a meaningful way, and sort of drive content through that channel more and more. Which is why we added IMA, influencer company, to S4 last month. It happened about 3 to 4 weeks ago. And I think in general, I don't think we'll get rid of advertising. I imagine even some of the streaming giants might have to default to it at a certain moment in time. I just think it's going to be about the context of that advertising and if it feels like it's added value in the consumer journey. And that's where I think the industry has dropped the ball completely. We've made something that we actually really like in the real world, which is personalization and personal attention. It's a cheers effect, everybody knows your name. We love that in the real world. We've made it something that feels very dystopian online, right? Because it's relentless retargeting. It's a complete lack of empathy on top of the engineering. I think we're going to be forced into doing that much better. And I think that's a lot of our conversation. If you do that really well, I don't think people have a huge problem with advertising. But it needs to be, the mindset needs to be considerably different.
Okay, so now we're going to see some work that is going to back up what you just said.
I hope so.
So
actually,
the audience?
So for the audience, I think I'm just going to show a bit of a subset because the number one thing we hear from clients, and we talk to quite a lot of them, is they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They need more stuff. They have less money. And social is a huge driver of this. It's about these millions of different formats, but then they're also being told it needs to be personalized. So we have a bit of the three ways to actually play in this space well. that we explain to clients, and we take them sort of through the roadmap. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is fit for format meets cost per asset. So our industry in general is hyper siloed, and it's siloed at the client side, it's siloed at the agency side. So because TV is often still called the hero deliverable, what happens is a traditional agency thinks of a TV spot, that TV spot is made, and that TV spot is handed over to another company, another team. They look at digital, and maybe it's even handed over to a team that looks at social, and there's a team that looks at e-commerce and sales. And you sort of get all of these steps and silos in place. This is what we solve with integrated production. It's not rocket science, but I want to show this because I think it's really, really important. Gives you more for less, but I think it also creates much, much better work. This is an example for Starbucks at home, which Nestlé has the perpetual rights to Starbucks. And it's a typical S4 client in the sense that it's a new brand for Nestlé. They can pilot, they can try something new. So we did that for them with integrated production. We'll take about 1.5 minutes.
We're here in a 3-day shoot to get a full comprehensive campaign to be used all over the world for the introductory campaign to support the global launch of Starbucks at home. So the creative idea is follow the siren home.
With integrated production, you basically have multiple crews. You have your social crew, your main crew, and your photography. And we're really trying to be as efficient as possible. So each crew uses the same talent in the same locations, and then really try to maximize the output of a shooting day. So we're a digital production company, so we really think in social, we think mobile first. And what that means is that we frame it in such a way that we can extract all the assets for all the different platforms online.
So the assets will be able to be adapted locally in format and language in a very inexpensive and rapid way. We've been able to condense in 3 days 2 different crews that are putting together all these assets. So we have 2 locations at the same time where we have our creative agency and all the power of our production house that will allow us to get a good number of assets very fast at a very competitive cost.
So from a global shoot, we're producing all the assets for the local markets. So the local markets can cherry pick their favorite pieces of asset, and we'll then localize them, translate them, and make them available for download.
Without sacrificing the quality. This is a premium brand that definitely has to make sure that all its communication is really as premium as the product that we sell.
So sort of an easy sell to clients, more for less. We call that cost per asset, right? If you look at traditional production processes, you'll shoot a big TV spot, you'll probably get maybe 3 versions of that spot, maybe 5. Your cost per asset is going to be anywhere between 30K to 300K. This gets you, in this case, 127 different assets, so cost per asset goes down immensely. But this drive for efficiency, I think, is table stakes, or should be table stakes. It's the effectiveness of the work. Because we have creative teams that know everything about Snap, Twitter, Facebook, and they're going, this is a creative idea. What is that within this channel? What's the user behavior we can tap into? What's the understanding of take home within a mobile space? And you can actually really sort of embed that in the creative thinking. So it's not just a cost and efficiency thing, it's the effectiveness of the work you make. So we call that fit for format. It's not rocket science, but because of the siloed nature of our industry, client side and agency side, it's a first step. Second step is data-driven.
Can I just interrupt you with one thing, because I also want to see this, but what is to stop Starbucks at this point just doing this in-house? Why do they need
We are
you
doing
guys?
that. I mean, words can go on, Shiseido, Avon. We are building in-house. I mean, the answer to your question, Joanna, if it is in the interest of the client to do it, we'll do it.
No, but what's to stop them from looking at you and thinking, I need a data person, I need a creative team, I can build this in-house, like Apple had Media Arts Lab.
Sure.
What is to stop Starbucks doing?
Well, the answer is nothing, right? So if, we had a discussion last night with a McKinsey, Pete and I had dinner with a McKinsey consultant, and we were talking about, he said, his view was that our view is that in-housing is the dominant force at the moment. I think a slide.
And in-housing is what exactly? It's where you put people within companies?
Yes, it's not Oliver, which is, the people at Unilever who are from Oliver wear Unilever t-shirts, but they're Oliver employees.
Right.
True in-house is where they're the employees. I mean, you can talk about programmatic, that's what you do.
To your question, what is in-housing? Initially, it was a huge buzzword on the media side, and the people were intoxicated by the idea that I suddenly don't need any agencies at all, and I could do this myself. And I hate to quote Jurassic Park, but before asking, should I do this? Or can I do this? It's about should I do this? And I think in the years, it's been about 5 years since the first marketer really came out publicly saying I've in-housed. I think there's been backlash to it. There's been rethinking of it. And generally, it's this idea that there's a spectrum of control that most marketers need to reevaluate where they are today and where they want to be. And for some of them, and Netflix is a great example, the answer is it makes sense for their business, which is entertainment, to own all of the means of production as it relates to reaching customers, engaging with existing customers and prospects. It makes sense for them to have that skill in-house. And so they've taken on not just hiring those people and training them, but building career paths for them, making sure they stay sharp. More often than not, for us, we'll start with a marketer who says, I have a business case, I've done the math, and it makes sense for me to fire my media agency. Help me do that. And in the course of a few months, you realize, the other side of the equation is, okay, great, you fired your agency. Okay, what if we told you that hiring folks is just the beginning? Right, hiring replacement is just the beginning. To take some of the best talent we have in the ecosystem and embed them in the walls of a single marketer and have them work on that single marketer, you have to keep them nourished, you have to keep them interested, and so there's an entire organizational change element. We have an in-house marketer who has hired a bunch of people from the industry. They've been there now about 2 years, and they're saying, well, why am I not promoted? And their boss is saying, well, this is a 110-year-old company. I mean, you've got to go through steps. And they're saying, but if I was still in the industry, I would have been promoted by now. So this is something that we're at the early stages of. And I think most people will move ahead on that spectrum of control. I think the K2 ANA report really shone a light on, if you don't know what's happening, Wesley's talking about table stakes. If you're not looking at your contracts, if you're not asking how much of your media is working, I would say you're behind at this point, but not everybody is going to go all in-house. So our process is really a lot like a personal trainer. Part of being a personal trainer is getting people to do something they haven't done before, to build a muscle that maybe is kind of weak. The other less sexy part of personal training is just getting someone to show up every day at 7 a.m. when they would rather be in bed, right? And so the discipline of it, I think, is the part that people don't really acknowledge, but it plays out, and that's directly led to our practice changing to bring a different type of talent who can be that guide throughout many stages of what this looks like.
I mean, there's an eerie comparison to Brexit and the British voter in the sense that marketers want to take back control. I think marketing has been stripped since 2008. Zero-based budgeting probably is the arch example of the stripping. And now in a 24/7 always-on world, where things are so dynamic and they're not static anymore, you need the resources internally. I mean, you can do co-location. That's a halfway house, and you can do outhouse. But we look at it across the spectrum. And look, I'm aware of 2 companies that are selling their in-house agencies now. But that's not because in-housing was wrong. It's because both companies have got cost issues. And the people at the center look at 180 people in an in-house agency in London, which is one example, and say, why have we got the head count in that? Let's get rid of it. It's not because it necessarily was the right or the wrong thing to do. They didn't look at what Emily referred to as, should we do this?
Right. Okay, so Wes, back to you.
And I would say, from our perspective, our 2 biggest clients have very sizable in-house teams. I would say it's actually easier for us to work with those types of companies because they have the mindset of agility, always on. So they tend to need more help. Second step, data-driven, very much the key to a lot of what we talk about from a results perspective. I think the irony with programmatic for a lot of brands has been this idea that I now need to make even more stuff, which takes away some of the ROI. I think the screen just switched. I'm not sure if we're still seeing it here. Can we switch the screen back to the laptop? Yes. So this is for Narcos Season 3, no spoilers, but it ends badly for everyone. Data-driven, right? So this is Netflix. We've been working with Netflix for about 5 years now when they first took their media in-house, and we've been their content partner since day one. And this is really changing how they think about sort of scaling creativity through data. So we're doing normal segmentation. We're going after people interested in sports, local events, business, all of that type of stuff. But we're not then going, let's make 5 versions or 500 versions or 5,000 versions. We talk about creative frameworks. There's best practice, logo at the beginning, logo at the end, specific call-outs depending on who we think we're talking to, and then huge amount of different input that we can actually feed the machine with. And the machine in this case is Google, can also be Facebook. Feed the machine, have the machine optimize against actual user behavior. So what does that look like? A version for sports, a version for business. But it's not 2 versions. This framework has about 1.5 million different versions. We feed the machine optimizes, in this case, against the best 90. So huge upswing in results, but also huge learning from a creative perspective. Because a lot of this is gut feeling, but it used to be gut feeling on one ad. Now it's gut feeling, and then we get all of this information back and go, wait a minute, that completely changes how we think about this. So that, to me, data-driven, huge part of what we're doing with a lot of our clients.
Well, and also as a consumer, you would surely much rather have an ad that's targeted towards you. I would much rather have that because I'm more likely to avail myself of the product, but also I don't want something that doesn't relate to me. It's annoying.
And on the basis of what you've been doing recently,
exactly. What your most recent habits are.
Yeah. And I think this is still, and Netflix is very good at it, but I still think our industry is going to push into the next wave of this type of thinking, where we should know what episode I'm in. We should know, it's the stickiness component that I think is really interesting, because a lot of these brands now have data on stickiness. We met a company yesterday that knows exactly when somebody will become a user for life. Mm-hmm. But their marketing and advertising doesn't really work towards that moment of stickiness. I think that's going to be the next wave, really, this consumer decision journey mapping, including this data-driven component. And then maybe the last piece, just really quickly, the conservatism in our industry pushes back against shorter form, 30 seconds, 15, 10, 6. You've been in a lot of those conversations around Snap. This is a 1.7 second ad because we sat down with Facebook, we went, give us the actual stats. People spend 1.7 seconds looking at ads. Let's make a 1.7 second ad as the baseline. This is for L'Oreal.
Why create thumb-stopping content when you can share your message in the blink of an eye? Introducing the unmissable ad for L'Oreal Paris Unbeliever Brow. 1.7 seconds of pure product demo that you can't possibly skip, aimed at busy women who don't have time to fix up their makeup, let alone watch Facebook ads. So why 1.7 seconds? According to Facebook, it's the average amount of time people spend viewing each post. So we put this one insight at the heart of our creative. The ads were viewed 6 times more often than regular L'Oreal ads, earning 5 times the engagement than what was spent. Simple as that. It's the shortest ad with the shortest case film.
So instead of fighting back against the dying of the light, to an extent, embracing it, understanding format.
Listen, I'm thrilled as a consumer. I'd much rather have ads that targeted me very specifically at 1.7 seconds. God bless you, sir. All right, thank you very much. We're out of time. But I just want to recommend a podcast I heard Martin on called the Looking Glass podcast, which just dropped by someone called Charles Day. If you want to hear more of him, and you've heard a lot of him, but if you want to hear more creative insights, it's a very good podcast and it just dropped. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Joanna.
Thank you.